Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this press conference with the Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial, Summary or Arbitrary Executions, Madame Agnes Callamard. So we'll start with some short introductory remarks from the Special Rapporteur, and then we'll move on to questions from you. And today we have about 45 minutes for this press conference, so we'll aim to wrap up about 1:45, something like that. I'm told the Special Rapporteur does have a little bit of free time after this, so if you are interested in individual interviews, you can come and see me and we'll start a list for individual interviews after the press conference. So, over to you, Madame Callamard.
Here, it's done. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My introductory remarks are going to focus on the report I have produced for the Third Committee of the General Assembly, but I am happy to speak on a range of other matters related to my mandate. My report this year focused on death penalty and particularly on consular assistance to foreign nationals detained abroad. I decided to write on this topic because I, first of all, came across a large number of people that are detained on death row around the world and who are not nationals of the country that are detaining them. And they confront a large number of difficulties and are, in fact, particularly vulnerable to the imposition of death row. So that was the first factor that got me to reflect on the situation of foreign nationals. The second reason is that under international law, there was no evident way of suggesting that the countries of origin of those detainees people and a duty to provide them with assistance when confronted with death penalty. So I decided it was important to explore international law and to see whether we could make an argument that the provision of assistance to people on death row by their country of origin was actually an obligation placed upon the country of origin. And the third reason that prompted me to write this report is the fact that a number of countries, including abolitionist countries, that have foreign that have nationals detained abroad on charges of counterterrorism, were absolutely very reluctant to provide any kind of assistance to their nationals, leading me to suggest that they were, even though abolitionists, were in fact imposing death penalty by proxy. And that also prompted me to reflect on the situation of nationals that are detained abroad, that are facing death penalty, the kind of rights that they have as foreign nationals, the kind of obligations that their countries of origin have for them, and to detail those obligations in the report, but in particular in the last part of the report, which provide guidelines to countries on their responsibilities. So the report demonstrates, I think, successfully that under international law, countries of origin have a duty to assist their foreign nationals, their nationals that are detained abroad, that are on death row. They have a duty to do so without discrimination, either on the basis of race, social class, any form of identity, or on the basis of the crime committed by their nationals. I've also shown that, in fact, that is not only a human rights obligation, but it is also emerging as customary law. I particularly insisted on the duty of non-discrimination. I mentioned already that one of the reasons that prompted me to write on the topic was the question of nationals detained abroad on charges of counterterrorism, the so-called foreign fighters, Daesh fighters that are imprisoned in particular by Iraq, and yet their countries of origin were unwilling to provide them with the assistance that they deserve or that they had a right to. And if they did provide assistance, it was really substandard. So I wanted to explore more that notion of discrimination in the way countries approach their support to their own national. I looked at various practices around the world and realized that when you are a national detained abroad, whether or not you're going to be receiving assistance is very much a lottery. And I'm not only talking about those that are charged with counterterrorism. More generally, if you have a family, if you have a network in your country of origin that is able, that has the means to work on your behalf, your country, the officials of your country are more likely to do something for you. But if you're coming from a very disadvantaged, very poor, very neglected community in your country of origin, if you have no family or if your family is disempowered at all level, then you are very unlikely to get any kind of support from your own country. So that lottery really challenged my sense of equality before the law. And I was absolutely clear that my report needed to address that and to ensure that at least all nationals detained abroad should be able to make the same claims, whatever their social class or ethnic or racial origin, and whatever the nature of the crime they have committed. Because that was a second form of discrimination. Countries may be willing to support their nationals, but or except when those nationals had committed the most serious or heinous crimes, such as those related to counterterrorism. What I argue in the report is that actually, for all countries that have abolished death penalty, the most serious crime is really the litmus test. We cannot be tested on our commitment to abolition for political crimes, for instance, for crimes related to freedom of expression. It's easy to take a stand against death penalty on those occasions. But we are really tested in our commitment to abolition when confronted with a citizen of our own country that has indeed committed the most serious crime, the very crime that that can only be the object of death penalty, as a matter of fact. So I argued both under international law, but more generally or more largely on the philosophical level, that countries that have abolished death penalty should not bring back death penalty by the little door. They should be extremely careful not to engage in death penalty by proxy, and they should stand firm on their commitment for abolition, because not doing so is sending the very wrong message around the world, and is suggesting that some of our citizens are subhuman, are unworthy of equal human rights protection. So I spent quite a lot of focus in that report making this argument. And the last part of the report is 10 pages of guidelines on what consular assistance should include, from the training of the consular officials to the pre-trial support, the support during the trial, post-trial. I insist on the importance of communication with the family. I have met many families whose loved ones are detained abroad, and it is they too are victims. They are placed in an impossible position, and they have to rely on their government to access their loved one. So the relationship with the family is extremely important, as is the relationship, as is the action to be taken in if and when the detainees is actually put to death. So there are a number of implications for the consular officials, which I detail in the report. So my hope is that by so doing, I will contribute to, if not manage to actually get in place a universal set of standards as to what constitute consular assistance and the integration of that right in the domestic system of countries around the world. I should also add that, interestingly enough, some of the countries that have been the most the best at providing their nationals with consular assistance are not necessarily the richest country. In fact, the country that has done the most on that regard is Mexico, a middle-income country. I have in the report provided examples from Nigeria, examples from Indonesia. So a number of, not saying that those two countries have a policy of support, but they have on several occasions provided support, which could be used as a model. So that's it. That's basically what my report is all about. Yesterday, when I presented the report, I also highlighted some of the work I had done for the last 8 months, mostly in relation to my investigation into Jamal Khashoggi's killing. I gave a little update to the members that were present in the room, and I'll be happy to also provide an answer on those issues. Thank you very much.
So, before we move to questions, I wanted to mention to you we have copies of the Special Rapporteur's latest press release at the back of the room on that little table over there. And then, Errol, are you here for the Anka seat?
Yes.
First question goes to the representative of the UN Correspondents Association. Go ahead, Errol.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, Madam Callamard, welcome. Thank you very much for this briefing. I'm Errol Avdevich for the Public Press as well. Since I was covering the issue of your engagement regarding the investigation of the Jamal Khashoggi, I will first actually put the question that regarding your report, but I do have a question on that as well. So my first question is, since you mentioned that not necessarily that they are the biggest or strongest or wealthiest country, mostly engaged in not allowing death penalty by proxy, as you described it, would you mind to put some other beside Mexico, Nigeria, Indonesia? I'm not sure whether Indonesia do have a death penalty or Mexico. And what about Balkan countries, if you can say something, because there are foreign fighters coming from there. And then I will have also on Jamal Khashoggi question.
So you're asking me whether the Balkan countries are providing consular assistance on all cases. I'm looking at my colleagues. I have to say I have not had many cases of nationals of Balkan countries facing
very good news.
Death penalty anywhere. In the case of the foreign fighters, we have sent a couple of letters. Kosovo was one of them. I think that may have been the one country that comes to mind immediately. Croatia? No, I forgot. I will need to check which exact country from the Balkan is alleged to have foreign fighters abroad. Do they provide consular assistance to their foreign nationals? If they have not responded to my letters, I will not be in a position to tell you whether they do and the nature of that foreign assistance. So what I will do is take your contact details and get back in touch with you over the very specific questions of that Balkan country.
If I may, another question as well. during the months we were, 1 year actually, we were following the saga of the late Jamal Khashoggi, our colleague that was brutally killed in consulate. You was on the top of the game, if I may put it like that. I would like to ask you a very simple question, though. Are you, Madame Callamard, satisfied with the response of the United Nations and particularly of the Secretary General and with the inquiry, whether your inquiry or I would say inquiry by the journalists for all that period of 1 year? Thank you.
Well, satisfied, no. I will not use this word. What I have found out throughout my inquiry and after the release of the report is what I have confronted is a reluctance of UN decision-making bodies to take a stand and to act in a more courageous and direct fashion. What I have confronted is the force of inertia hidden behind protocol, legal, or administrative reasons. And I say hidden because I am very aware of the difficult environment we live in and the difficult environment that the Secretary General and others have to operate within. I am aware of the UN Charter and of the framework in place that guide the actions and positions and capacities to do so by the Secretary General, the Security Council, and so on. However, I am also convinced that these framework, legal framework, policy frameworks, guide, but can be interpreted in a way that could empower institutions or individuals to move in a certain direction. In my opinion, that has not happened in that case. That's why I'm using the word hidden behind that framework, that there has not been an attempt to interpret the charter, the framework, the precedent to empower a decision-making towards a more courageous outcome. What I wanted after my investigation was a follow-up step, because my investigation, as I have explained, is a human rights investigation. That's the mandate I have received. I do not have the mandate to explore in depth individual liability. And it felt to me that, as you all know, in the case of killings of journalists, what we want to be able to ascertain is a chain of command, is who ordered, who incited, who allowed, who turned a dead ear or a blind eye to what was going to happen. So it's really the chain of command that we must be able to unpack if we are going to have any impact on journalists around the world. That chain of command I started exploring in my report, but I was limited because of my mandate. I was really hoping that the Secretary General could take the work I had done and said, right, let's at least see what can be done, how far more we can push our understanding of chain of command in that context. It would have been a great case study. I'm not suggesting that whoever did the work would have had sufficient evidence to reach a strong conclusion, but they would have pushed the boundaries of what we as an international community are prepared to do. That I deeply regret that the Secretary General or other institutions within the UN did not take this opportunity to push further our understanding of chain of command and our commitment to tackle the chain of command. I think it's a real pity. What does it mean? It means probably that at least within the current context, special procedures, people like me, are probably the better, more purposeful institution within the UN, because we are independent. We don't speak for the UN. We are independent expert. The mandate is given to us. It's then up to us to decide how we're going to work on it. So the last 6 months, and particularly the last 3 months, have demonstrated to me that actually special procedures can probably do a great deal, and that we can do more, and that we need to do more in a context where other institutions are either unable or reluctant to do it. Maybe that in 5 years, those institutions will be more prepared. Maybe 5 years ago, they were more prepared. At the moment, it's not the case. Therefore, we as special procedures, because we have that mandate, because we have that flexibility, because we should not be dependent on political decision-making, and because we're only appointed for 6 years and we should not aim at being appointed for further than that, for all those reasons, we as special procedures have probably what is needed to advocate, to push, and to ensure that the issue of that I tackled, which is a killing of a journalist and the chain of command behind that killing, that these are on the agenda, on our agenda, and that we use all the instruments at our disposal to live and to keep it on the agenda, to make sure that no decision makers can ignore the fact that it is an international agenda issue, and that we are going to keep pushing for answers to it. That is a realization I've reached, that I, as a special procedures, will have to do far more than I thought I would have to do initially, but I'm prepared to do it, and I think many of my other colleagues are also prepared to do so.
I see a question first from Abdul Hamid, and then from Ibtisam, and then I see James in the back after that.
Thank you, Madame Callamard. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arab. I have 2 questions. One on the on Palestine.
On what?
Palestine.
Palestine.
Starting March 30th, 2018, Palestinians in Gaza started peaceful marches toward defense, toward the border. The Israeli snipers start shooting those civilians. Over 270 were killed, including over 30 children. Yeah. Journalists were targeted and killed, nurses, young people, media people. So a variety of civilians were targeted and killed. Does your mandate authorize you to do investigation in these kind of killings? My second question about Khashoggi's murder. Personally, I want to ask you, do you believe that MBS, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, has prior knowledge, planning, involvement of this murder? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So absolutely, with regard to Palestine, I don't know how many letters I have issued to the Israeli authorities over the last 2 years, but quite a few in relation to the killings you're talking about. I have also made a request for a mission there. I'm not sure I have received an answer, but I'm not expecting much on it. I am I have the mandate to investigate those killings to the extent that you can investigate from Geneva or from New York. I have participated and worked closely with the Commission of Inquiry that was established and that produced a report 6 months ago on those killings. I've worked very closely with them and gave them my analysis both of the legal, international legal framework and of specific cases. And I work closely with the independent expert on the situation of Palestine, because he has the lead really on those questions. So that is what I can do at the moment, at least. As you know, this is a very difficult country because it's hard to get access to the country and to therefore to actually investigate on the ground. But that does not stop information from coming up. I think the Commission of Inquiry's report was extremely detailed, provided ample evidence of excessive use of force and arbitrary killings. And yes, I do as much as I can in those to denounce those killings, to ask searching questions, and to support the work of my colleagues. With regard to your question, I'm not sure what I believe matters, and I don't mean to, not to answer your question, but it's not really my role to believe. I am a special rapporteur. I'm here to provide findings that are based on fact. And if I start, sharing belief, I think I will undermine the legitimacy of my work. So what do I know rather than what do I believe? What do I know is that there was a special operation that was well organized, well resourced, that involve a premeditated murder. I pointed out that I didn't know whether the murder was planned from the start or whether it was planned only 24 hours or so before it happened. But I have no doubt that a murder was part of the plan. I also know for a fact that there were many officials in Riyadh that were involved into the organization of this special operation. I also know for a fact that what happened after the killing involved authorities in Riyadh, including the fact that there were some 17 Saudi officials that came after the killing to investigate, supposedly, and to clean up the crime scene. What all of these information come together, what does it show? It shows that this was a state killing. It shows that this was not a rogue operation by individuals who decided one day that they're going to kill Mr. Khashoggi. That is just not what the fact and international law tell us. Once we have determined that this is a state killing, a killing for which the state is responsible, the next step is to try to understand what do we mean by state. How far up do we go in that state? So what I do know is that for a killing of that nature to have taken place in a country such as Saudi Arabia, which is extremely centralized in its decision-making, a number of very high-level officials had to be involved. I do not know whether the Crown Prince ordered the crime. What I do know is that there is enough evidence pointing to his responsibility at some level. Is it at the level of ordering? Is it at the level of inciting? Is it at the level of criminally negligent? Is it at the level of knowing but really not acting on what he knew? His responsibility can cover a range of scenarios. I cannot tell you which of those scenarios apply to his case. What I can tell you is that there is no doubt that one of them applied to his case. That's what I do know. And for my belief, I'll keep them for myself. Thank you.
Ibtisam, I saw you had a question, and then I see James after that, and then Masood, and then Frank.
Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim from the Daily Arabic Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have a few questions. The first one, a follow-up regarding Khashoggi. So you said that you are sure that there is, it was on a high level, the decision-taking. Could you please specify more the highest level you think that was really knowing and giving order? And then another follow-up question. You said that you don't have the right to individual reliability to continue investigation. Are you going to take any further steps in this regard? And I want to go back to the issue of ISIS fighters and the responsibility of their national countries for that you talked about. To which extent do you think European countries specifically, like France, Britain, and Germany, are really are taking their responsibility according to international law, either to not only assist their citizens, but also maybe to ensure that they should get a fair trail, whether in their original countries or wherever?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So very quickly regarding the high level of decision making. So what do we know again? We know that 11 people have been charged, are facing trial. The highest level individual is Mr. Assiri, who is was deputy director of the intelligence service. We know for a fact that the prosecutor of Saudi Arabia, in one of his public statements, has mentioned by name Saud al-Qahtani as having incited the team to not to kill, according to his statement, but Saud al-Qahtani, according to the Crown Prosecutor, met with a 15-person team or some of them and said, bring me back Mr. Khashoggi, who is a threat to national security. That we know as a fact. It's established. We also know that they've used, that the team has used private jet, expensive private jet, that some of them traveled on diplomatic passport, that the private jet had diplomatic clearance, which indicates that it was an official visit of some kind with a military or intelligence component. We know, of course, that the killing took place in the consulate, that the consul himself was somehow involved. The killing took place in his room. All of that indicate very high level of decision-making. We know that Saud al-Qahtani was a personal advisor to MBS. We know that Mr. Qahtani has been named by some of the women who are currently imprisoned as him being present during interrogation and during torture. We know that Mr. al-Qahtani was also named in the context of the Ritz-Carlton as having been present during some of the interrogation. And we know as well that Mr. Qahtani was present during the abduction or detention of the Prime Minister of Lebanon. He was one of two persons, in fact, who was involved in the interrogation of Mr. Hariri. So that man is present in all major acts of repression in the country. And these acts of repression are organized and they are clearly not the product of just Mr. Qahtani. They are well organized. I mean, I'm not going to go back to the last 2 or 3 years of in Saudi Arabia. So that is what we know. Now, we can, deduct a number of things from what we know, which is that those actions are part of a continuum of which amounts, in my view, to act of repression from Mr. Hariri's abduction to the killing of Mr. Khashoggi and then the surveillance of other journalists living abroad. All of those cannot be seen as the action of individuals at the middle level of a government or of any kind of regime. I mean, it's just not, it's neither logical nor historical nor factual. So that's how much we know. What does that mean in terms of the highest level of decision-making? again, I can't tell you what I believe. I can only give you the fact, and I think you can extract your own conclusion, your own logical inference, as lawyers will say, from those facts. It's interesting, the question of individual liability. In the report and in my investigation, I really pushed that question because I felt in the case of Mr. Khashoggi, I could not hide really behind the practice of the last 40 years by suggesting I cannot get into naming people. It would have been silly. The names had been around in the public domain for the last 6 months. So I needed to engage with the names, but to do that in a way that was respectful and will not go overboard. So there are a lot of people I don't name in my report, by the way, because I don't feel confident that they've actually committed something so grave that they should be named in my report. So individual liability is a delicate issue. It's one that we need to approach with care, but it is one that I feel special procedures in particular should be prepared to do in keeping with good practice and good standard. I am certainly prepared. I have done so. I pushed it in the context of that report, and I will be prepared to continue pushing it and hopefully doing that with my colleagues, particularly if we're the only one within the UN system that are prepared to do so. If there were other institutions, we may not need to do it. But at the moment, no. So we need to really look at our mandate, look at the practice, look at the best standard, and see how far we can go in a way that is respectful of the mandate, as well as respectful of people's right to privacy and so on. With regard to the responsibility of Europe, let me say of the countries of origin of the foreign fighters that are currently detained in Iraq. There are several levels of responsibilities. The first I have detailed in the report. They should provide them with consular assistance because all of them are detained on charges that carry the death penalty, and consular assistance can make the difference. So that's the first thing. If they are not providing that assistance, they are violating their obligations under international law. Second, most of those detainees have been tortured. According to the information at our disposal, there too, the countries of origin have a responsibility to protect them against acts of torture. And this, if this has not been done, they are also failing to abide by their obligation. Fair trials. I have detailed trials in Iraq in one of my reports 2 years ago, not less than that, a year and a half ago. Unfortunately, there has not been tremendous progress, a few progress, but not a lot. So fair trial guarantees are not in place. And most, not just foreign fighters, but Iraqis as well, are have access to their lawyers a few minutes before the trial. Those trials are usually collective. Confession, as I mentioned, has been extracted under torture. So for all those reasons, fair trial, the trials are not fair. Now, the issue that is very important for me, and one that I absolutely want to place at the center of our discussion, is that yes, the process is unfair to those alleged Daesh fighters. It is not conducive to knowing the truth. It is not a process that uncovers the crimes too quick. And most importantly, it is not a process that is based on the victims. So the victims are not present in the trials in Iraq. They have only been present in a very few trials. The victims have not had their say in court. Justice has not been given to the victims of Daesh. Those individuals, foreign fighters or Iraqi Daesh fighters, are accused of membership to a terrorist organization. That's the beginning and the end of the charge. They are not accused of killing. They are not accused of rape. They are not accused of sexual violence. They are not accused of massacres. None of that. What does that mean? It means that the crime that they've committed is constructed as a crime against the state. It's not constructed as a crime against people. The people are not there. The people don't have a say. The people can't even tell what was done to them. There has not been one trial for the Yazidi victim, but plenty of trial for Daesh fighters. That, to me, is one of the major violations that European countries are also committing, not only by letting their citizens being tortured and facing unfair trial, but also it's a violation in front of history. You know, that 4, 5, 10 years of the most gruesome war that the world has known for decades, you know, that we have no proper process of handling those crimes, of responding, of knowing the truth, of giving the victims a place in history so that they can be heard. That, to me, is a very grave crime that not only Europe, actually, many countries are committing. That is also driving me. That's why I'm keeping this issue on the agenda for the victims and for the perpetrators and for us. You know, we need to have a moment of reckoning with our past, recent past, and we haven't had that.
I see James first, and then Masood.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
Frank.
Thank you. My name is Masood.
No.
First James, and then Masood.
Thanks, Masood. You can go next, I promise. Sorry. Hi, no worries. Thank you, Ms. Callamard. It's James Reinl here with Al Jazeera. I think Ibtisam also asked you what your next steps would be on the Khashoggi investigation, and I would also like to hear that. My own personal question. You were talking before about people that were named and not named in your report. I don't know if you can cast your mind back, but at the time of the Khashoggi murder, the Turkish investigators were releasing information to the media about phone calls at the time going back to Saudi Arabia. 4 of them going to a guy called Bada al-Askar, who is the head of Prince MBS's private office, but also of the Misk Foundation. Now, he wasn't in your report. I'm just wondering if you did investigate that and didn't find anything or what happened there. And I asked because the Misk Foundation has become controversial in recent months. There was a UN Misk event arranged in New York, human rights protesters saying, no, this is just window dressing for a dictatorship. And the UN shouldn't be involved in it. Well, there's another one next month in Paris, UNESCO and Misk. And I'm just wondering if you feel that the UN should be partnering with this organization and whether or not you can do anything about it.
Okay, next steps. So I am pursuing a couple of leads that I will not detail now. So the investigation is an ongoing investigation. Along with the investigation proper, I'm also pursuing the more advocacy agenda. So I am absolutely committed to continue advocating for accountability, not just judicial accountability, but also political accountability. I've taken a stand on the G20 in Riyadh. I've used the opportunity yesterday during my presentation to call on government to continue speaking up, that silence is not an option, and speaking up not just in a General Assembly on talking about the violence against journalists, but speaking up in the context of a G20 meeting as well. So I'm continuing to do that, and I will, I think, remain a bit an annoyance for many people who will want me to move on and the rest of the world to move on. I don't believe we should move on because, as I have explained, the killing of Mr. Khashoggi was so public, was so gruesome. involved so much knowledge now and so much information that moving on, as I have been told I should do, will amount to enshrine inaction and impunity in our ways of being as an international community, and that we cannot afford. If somebody like Mr. Khashoggi, a well-known journalist, a Washington Post journalist, could be killed and that there is no price to be paid for that killing, that is sending such a wrong message. Such a wrong message. And for that reason, I'm never going to give up on keeping being an annoyance. Advocating whenever I have the opportunity and pushing our elected representative not to be fearful and to speak up. Because that silence is deadly. Silence is deadly. That links up to your questions regarding Minsk Foundation. Why didn't I mention those phone calls? Yes, I was, of course, made aware of those calls and a few other related issues. I could not find any evidence to it. And, my standard of evidence were very high. It doesn't mean that those phone calls have not taken place. It doesn't mean that a video of the killing did not happen, as it has also been alleged. I just did not have sufficient evidence to make any conclusions with it. So that's why it's not in the report. What worries me at the moment around the post-Jamal Khashoggi killing is, like I said, the capacity of the international community to move on. And that is reflected in those meetings you've described. It's reflected next week in the Davos in the Desert meeting, which apparently may involve a number of journalists as moderators of those sessions. Just putting that on your guys' agenda, because I think that's something that, if it is correct, should lead us to a strong reaction. So I'm not suggesting that every aspect of Saudi Arabia's work, financial, economic, cultural, is reprehensible at all. That's not what I have done, and I at least that's not what I have recommended. However, in the current context, where so little has been done for accountability, any attempt on the part of Saudi Arabia and its partners to engage in a PR operation around Saudi Arabia image, selling Saudi Arabia soft power, pretending that they are defending cultural rights, movies, and so on. That, to me, is not acceptable in the current context. It's not acceptable because too little has been done at that point to demand and receive justice for Jamal Khashoggi. So I may not take action on every one of those events, but when they are brought to my attention and when I think, such as Davos in the Desert being held in the Ritz-Carlton of all places, I just think, come on. And if journalists are participating to it, are moderating session, that is really extremely problematic, in my opinion. Okay, so it's I will not say it's I'll say it means putting your possibly personal advantage, financial or otherwise, in front of values and principles, including those related to your colleagues and freedom of the press. So that's where I stand, but I will not suggest I'm going to act on every one of those events. I will be strategic and work with others on that front.
So I see first Masoud and then Frank and then the gentleman in the back, and that'll be all the questions that we take.
Hi, thank you for having
First Masoud, Frank, and then you.
Thank you.
Which one is
Thank everybody at this point. Hi, Frank Uciardo from TRT World. Thank you for having this press conference and being available to us. There's an old saying, the tone is set from the top. Do you believe that the Saudi Crown Prince had set a cultural environment which encouraged violence against journalists, number one? And number two, can you talk about some of the so-called abolitionist nations that mistreat their detainees and prisoners?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have no doubt the tone is set from the top, and I have said that in the report. I have no doubt that the 2 or 3 years of repression that have taken place in Saudi Arabia, including those that I've detailed, can only have taken place with the involvement of people at the top. It's too well organized, too systematic not to be so. So yes, the tone is set from the top. That's why in my analysis of responsibilities of the Crown Prince and other top officials, I give a set of scenarios. One of them is, have you created the conditions that made the killing of Mr. Khashoggi possible? That too, under international criminal law, can be liable, can lead to personal liability. That's one of the options under for their Crown Prince or other officials' personal liability. So that's for... And in terms of the abolitionist countries, so all of you, Western Europe has abolished death penalty. A large number of them, I'm trying to think which doesn't, have had foreign fighters that have joined Daesh over the last 4 or 5 or so years. We have some information regarding what some of them may have done. We know that some of them may have been involved, in fact, in the killing of a journalist, the so-called Beatles, the British foreign nationals. We also know that others may have just been involved in more, logistical activities, cooking, and so on and so forth. A number of them are detained in Iraq. A number of them were detained by the SDF until last week, at least. So whether it's France, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, they all have. Many of them, I will say, have foreign fighters that are currently detained in Iraq. And if they are not in Iraq, then they are probably held somewhere in northeast Syria.
Which of any of those countries may be mistreating their detainees before they are processed legally?
They are not mistreating them, mistreating the detainees themselves. They are doing that by proxy. That's what I am arguing. Right. I am arguing that they know that their detainees are mistreated. This is a fact. It's not just my fact. It's everyone that has studied, including the UN, that has studied the current situation in the Iraqi judicial system and prison, know that the alleged Daesh fighters are mistreated and tortured. There is no way you don't know that. So when a country like France, the UK, or Belgium have foreign fighters detained by Iraq and refuse to see them, refuse or do not provide them with consular assistance, or when their assistance is limited to 5 minutes before the trial, they know that their citizens are being ill-treated, are being the victim of unfair trial, and will be sentenced to death because the nature of the charges can only result in death. That level of knowledge should lead to certain kind of response, and it is not. So they are failing to meet their due diligence obligation to protect the right to life, the right not to be tortured of their citizen. It is a form of death penalty by proxy, ill treatment by proxy, unfair trial by proxy. They have the knowledge but refuse to act on that knowledge. That is a violation of international law.
Masood, it's your turn.
Thank you. My name is Masood. As I represent Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. I am absolutely have to ask you about this extrajudicial killing going on. I mean, and also the Parliament, Indian Parliament also sanctioning them in occupied Kashmir and in anywhere in India for that matter, because after passing of this, what you call TADA, the so-called resolution, which entitles the soldiers to kill anybody at will. So that extrajudicial killing is already inbuilt. So you go into a gray area and all that. So what do you have to say about these Kashmiris now in Indian incarceration for the last 6 months? Can you tell us how does this all going to work out, and when all these killings are being justified?
So I have been working on Kashmir almost since the beginning of my mandate. I was appointed 3 years ago. I would like to refer you to something I did with my colleagues supporting my mandate in Geneva. I think at the end of May, we produced, and the letter is now available. So I issued a letter to the Indian authority that details something like 200-300 killings. And it's a long letter because every killing is detailed, where it happened, who was the victim, and who are the alleged perpetrators. That letter is now public on the OHCHR Special Procedures website. I have, over the last 3 years, received some response from the Indian authorities, but of a very poor quality usually, either denying the allegations or engaging into some justification, saying, those killed were terrorists. They were killed in a lawful way. They were killed because they were actually armed and were shooting at army or police officers. So the quality of the exchange over the killings in Kashmir is very poor. And I will suggest that it has gotten further poor after the decision of the Indian government to transform the status of Kashmir. So for the last month or so, I think I have issued one more communication to the authorities detailing what the kind of information that was at my disposal that covers killings, but also violation of access to information, violation of freedom of expression, and so on. So that communication was joint and involved a range of other special rapporteurs. The situation in Kashmir is a big concern for many of us within special procedures, but it is also a situation where we need to recognize that beside keeping the issue on the agenda and beside denouncing the violation, I am not sure that we, at this point, can be asked to have much more impact than that. It doesn't mean we're giving up at all, but it does mean that there are a number of other actors that are probably better placed than special procedures to move the issue to a better situation.
What I wanted to, impunity which is built into the whole process, the TADA resolution. And what about that? I mean, they can at will come in and take somebody, or, I mean, for years, for months they're gone, and then kill somebody.
Yeah. No, I mean, I am aware of that, of the legal framework that allows detention without charges and so on and so forth. You know, like I said, this has been on our agenda. This has been denounced. This has been the object of much communications. My predecessor, I think 4 years ago, went on a mission to India that included a focus on Kashmir. All of these have been done, and we continue to do so. But, you know, I was talking about the fact earlier that maybe right now in situations such as the killings of journalists, we special procedures have a strategic place to have an impact. I'm just not sure that at the moment we have a strategic place for an impact on Kashmir. So what we've got to do is to keep doing, to keep the issue on the agenda, make sure that we are continuing monitoring the situation, responding to the victims, trying to at least mediate somehow what is being the human cost of the situation. But what you're talking about, which is a much more political solution, I think that is not quite how we can have an impact.
So I see that we're running a tiny little bit short on time right now, so we'll take the last two questions in a batch. We'll take your question and also your question, and then we'll wrap it up after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan Bulkati I'm here, with the news agency RIA Novosti. There are several reports stating that the Ukrainian authorities have a number of secret jails, secret prisons in the eastern part of this country. So, according to these reports, numerous killings and tortures are conducted in those prisons. Are you aware of this information, and could such reports become a matter of your investigation or your research? I mean, maybe you've heard anything on the place called Mariupol. Yeah.
And then
thank you.
We'll just take the other question as well, and then you can answer both at the same time.
Celia Mendoza, VOA News Latin America. I have a question actually for your next year. We understand that Venezuela and the High Commissioner's office agreed that rapporteurs will be able to visit Venezuela. So far, I understand you have not been able to do any work there. What is your perspective of possible work with the Venezuelan government to do any reports on your particular mandate?
Thank you very much. I have not personally worked on the situation that you are describing in Ukraine. I believe that my colleague, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, has done so. He was in a mission in Ukraine not very long ago, and I know that those secret jails were part of his focus. But personally, I have not worked on those issues. I could, because if the conditions of detention are such that people's life is at risk, then it falls within my mandate, as well as other mandate. I am not aware of anyone having approached me with those issues, and they may have approached other special rapporteurs, and I am not aware of it. So that's for the question on Ukraine. With regard to next year and Venezuela, yes. So I have been monitoring the situation of Venezuela very, very closely. I have been, I've done some work on the political killings, on the killings that can be described as classical political in the context of the political unrest. I have also monitored the massive killings in the context of the war on crime. But I have not received personally information on those thousands of killings. I have worked very closely with the colleagues from the OHCHR that have been monitoring the situation in Venezuela, and I have been prepared to do whatever was needed. At this point, I would like to see how the opening of the OHCHR office in Venezuela is going to open avenues of dialogues and improvement in the situation. I will be, of course, open to going on a mission to Venezuela. The only reason why I will not go immediately is the fact that the OHCHR has produced an excellent report on the situation in Venezuela regarding extrajudicial executions, and I don't feel I have much to add for at least 1 year. We need to let things settle to see how the government responds, what kind of measures it takes in response to the evidence provided by the OHCHR. And then I will, then take stock and decide, does it make sense for me to go? I know they've opened the door to a number of rapporteurs. We're 50-something. So I don't want to engage into a battle with my colleagues. I think we'll have to decide what will make more sense for the country and for the people of the country. But I am absolutely keeping a very close eye on the situation. I have a personal interest in monitoring those war on crimes. Venezuela gets a lot of attention because of the political situation. I am very keen to ensure that we do not forget the thousands of people that are losing their lives in the context of the war on crimes. I've done so in the Philippines. There is an equivalent problem in Venezuela, in fact, worse problem in Venezuela. That's a theme for my mandate, to keep focusing on those very vulnerable populations. They may be criminals for all we know, but they are particularly poor, particularly disempowered. They may be drug users, they may be petty criminals, and thousands of them are executed in many parts of the world and without much reaction. So I'm very keen and committed to keep focusing and bringing a light on their plight.
So with that, we thank you all very much for coming to this press conference. The next press conference arranged by the UN Human Rights Office will be next Wednesday, when we will have the Special Rapporteur on Racism, who will be here 12:30. Mark your calendars. Thanks for coming today.